I agreed to the strangest thing anyone has ever asked me for 3 weeks after I moved into that little rental house. At that point, my life was down to basics. I had 2 duffel bags, a coffee maker, a folding chair, and a breakup still sitting on my nerves like bad weather that would not move on. The place I rented was small, a little one-floor house at the end of a quiet street, with thin walls, a square patch of grass, and a kitchen that looked older than I was. It was not meant to be home. That was the whole point. I told myself I would stay there a few months, work, sleep, keep my head down, and stop thinking about how fast one relationship had managed to drain all the color out of me. I was not there to start over. I was there to go numb in peace. The woman next door did not fit into that plan. I noticed her the second morning because she was outside before 7, watering the plants near her porch with the kind of calm rhythm that made me feel messy just walking past with my half-dead face and gas station coffee. She looked older than me by enough that I felt it right away, not in a dramatic way, just in the way she carried herself. Controlled, put together, like she had already lived through things and did not waste motion anymore. She glanced over once and said, "You must be the new tenant." I said, "Yeah, temporary." She gave the smallest smile. People always say that. That was it. No flirting. No long talk. But later that day when I came back from the store, she was dragging in a heavy box from her car, and I asked if she wanted help. She studied me for a second like she was deciding whether to refuse on principle. Then she said, "Only if you lift properly." I laughed for the first time in days. That bad? That box has glass equipment in it. I'd rather not hear it shatter. I carried it inside. Her place was neat without feeling cold. Books stacked in straight lines. No clutter. Soft lamplight even though it was still daylight. On the kitchen counter there were folders, a laptop, and a mug that had gone cold. She thanked me, told me her name was Mara, and when I asked what kind of equipment it was, she said she worked in reproductive medicine. She said it flat, like a fact, not an invitation for follow-up. So I just nodded and left. After that, we kept running into each other in small ways. She signed for a package when I was late getting home. I helped restart her car one morning when the battery died. She brought over a screwdriver set I'd mentioned I still had packed away somewhere. One night my porch light started flickering like a bad horror movie, and she stood in her driveway, looked up and said, "You know that would drive me insane." I said, "Good thing it's my porch." She folded her arms. "I have a ladder." So we fixed it together in the dark while she held the flashlight and corrected the angle every time I pointed it wrong. It should have been nothing. But those little nothing moments started building their own shape. She was easy to talk to because she did not pry. She never asked about my breakup until I mentioned it first, and even then all she said was, "You look like someone who needed silence more than advice." That landed harder than it should have. A few nights later it was raining, and I was sitting in my kitchen eating takeout straight from the carton when there was a knock at the door. Mara stood there in a dark coat with rain on her sleeves and an expression so steady it made me sit up before she said a word. "Can I come in for a minute?" she asked. I moved aside. "Yeah, sure." She stepped in, looked around once, then faced me. No wasted movement. No nerves that showed on the surface. "I'm going to ask you something unusual," she said. "And you can say no. You probably should. But I'd rather be direct than dishonest." I actually thought maybe something had happened. Some legal issue, some neighbor problem, anything normal. Then she said, "I want to have a child. I do not have much time left to keep putting it off. I do not have a partner I trust. I'm asking whether you would consider helping me as a donor." For a second, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. I stared at her. "What?" She did not flinch. "I know how this sounds." "No, I don't think you do." "I do," she said calmly. "That's why I came prepared to explain it clearly." I pushed my food aside and stood there looking at her like the room had tilted. "Why me?" "Because I know more about you than you think I do," she said. "Not private details. Just what I've seen. You are decent with people. You do what you say you'll do. You helped me 3 times before I ever asked. You do not perform kindness for attention. That matters to me." I let out a breath and rubbed my face. "Mara, this is insane." "It may be," she said, "but it is not careless." Then she explained it. No drama. No pressure in her voice. She said there would be paperwork, clear boundaries, no hidden expectations, no future demands dropped on me later. She said she was not asking for a relationship, not asking for promises, not trying to pull me into some fake version of family life. She wanted honesty and a clean agreement. That was all. I should have said no right then. I almost did. But the thing that got through my defenses was how unromantic she was about it. She did not lean on emotion. She did not try to charm me into anything. She stood in my tiny kitchen, rain tapping at the window, and treated me like someone capable of hearing something hard without being tricked. I said, "Why not go through a clinic?" A pause. Then, because trust is not a small detail to me. My neighbor came to me with something I never expected to hear, and her reason stopped me cold. What would you have said, yes or no? Tell me below. That answer stayed with me. After she left, I barely slept. I walked from one room to the other like I was trying to outpace the thought. Every version of it seemed like a bad idea. Too personal. Too complicated. Way too easy to regret. But under all that was one thing I could not shake. She had come to me with the kind of honesty most people spend months avoiding. No games. No fake softness. Just the truth laid flat on the table. The next evening I knocked on her door before I could talk myself out of it. She opened it and looked at me without surprise, like maybe she had expected either this or silence. I said, "I still think this is a mistake." Her face stayed unreadable. "That is fair." I nodded once. My chest felt tight. "But I'm saying yes. If this story already has you hooked, hit subscribe and drop a like. Takes 2 seconds. Now let me tell you what happened after I said yes. For the first time since I met her, she looked almost shaken. Not dramatic. Just one small crack in all that control. She stepped back to let me in, and right there, before anything had even started, I knew my quiet little temporary life was already over. The first few days after I said yes, everything between us became weird in a very quiet way. Nothing dramatic changed on the surface. I still got up, made coffee, answered emails, tried to pretend my little rental house was still just a place to pass through. Mara still left early some mornings, came back late others, and moved through her own place next door with that same calm, measured way of doing everything. But now there was this private fact sitting between us all the time. Every normal conversation had a second layer under it. The next evening she came over with a folder. A literal folder. I opened the door, looked at it and said, "That feels way too official." "It is official," she said. "That's the point." She stepped inside, set it on the table, and walked me through everything with the same steady tone she used the night she asked. Timing, tests, legal paperwork, what would and would not be expected from me. She had already spoken to an attorney. She had already written out what she wanted clear and what she wanted protected. It should have made me feel safer, and in some ways it did. But it also made the whole thing real in a way my brain had been trying hard not to accept. At one point I looked up and asked, "Did you plan all this before you asked me?" She held my eyes for a second. "I planned for the possibility that you might say yes." That answer should have put distance between us. Instead, it made me respect her more, which was its own problem. After that, we started seeing more of each other for practical reasons. At least that is what I told myself. She needed a ride one morning because her car was in the shop. I drove her across town before work, and on the way back she asked if I minded stopping for groceries because she had no time later. Then we were standing under harsh store lights arguing over tomatoes like we had been doing that for years. "You're picking them like they offended you," she said. "I'm checking them. You squeezed one into retirement." I looked at her. That was a normal amount of pressure. It was not. I grabbed another one and held it up. "Teach me, then." She took it from my hand, turned it once, and dropped it into the basket. "You look first. Then you decide. Not every decision needs brute force." I laughed, and she gave me that small side look she did when she knew she had landed something. That became our pattern. Small errands. Quick conversations that stretched. She'd knock to ask one question, then stay leaning in my doorway for 20 minutes. I'd bring over something simple like extra coffee filters or the mail that got dropped at my place by mistake, and somehow end up sitting in her kitchen while she finished tea and told me about a couple at work who had spent years trying to build a life and still spoke to each other like strangers in a waiting room. She never gave me private details. She was careful about that. But sometimes she spoke in a way that told me her job had shown her every version of hope and disappointment a person could carry in one body. One night we ate on her back porch because the weather was decent and neither of us felt like being inside. She had made pasta, nothing fancy, but she plated it like she respected meals more than I did. The street was quiet. Somebody far off had music playing low. Her porch light threw this soft circle around us that made the rest of the block feel far away. I said, "You do realize this doesn't feel distant at all." She set down her fork. I know. That was the thing with her. When something uncomfortable was true, she usually just said it. I leaned back in my chair. Then why are we doing this part? This part. The dinners. The rides. Sitting here like this. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. Because we already crossed into a kind of trust that would be strange to fake and stranger to ignore. I did not have a clean answer to that. The more time I spent around her, the more I saw things she clearly did not show many people. The way she rubbed the bridge of her nose when she was tired. The fact that she left books half open on the couch but kept every work document lined up perfectly. The way she got quiet after certain phone calls and would stand at her sink staring out the window for a minute before turning back like nothing happened. She became softer with me too, little by little. Not in some dramatic movie way. More in the way she stopped editing herself. She would answer the door in socks and an old sweater. She would admit when she had a bad day. Once, when her car still had not been fixed, she got in next to me, dropped her head back against the seat and said, "I am tired of being competent." I glanced at her. That bad? She let out a breath. No, just long. That should have been a small moment. It stayed with me all week. And the attraction was there. I knew it. She knew it. It sat in pauses that lasted a beat too long, in the way her voice changed when it got late, in how aware I became of her standing close to me in a kitchen that suddenly felt too small. But neither of us touched it. We kept acting like if we stayed careful enough, the line we had drawn at the beginning was still holding. It was not. I realized that the night the power went out on the block for almost an hour. She knocked on my door with a flashlight in one hand and 2 candles in the other. "I know you have exactly one emergency plan," she said, "and I'm guessing it's useless." "That is rude," I said. "My plan is excellent." She stepped inside. "What is it?" "Sit still and hope electricity comes back." That got an actual laugh out of her. She set the candles down, and we ended up in my living room with the windows open, talking in the dark like people who had known each other much longer than we had. No TV, no phones, nothing to hide behind. Just her voice, the warm air, and that feeling that every honest thing said out loud was making the space between us smaller. At one point she looked at me across the candlelight and said quietly, "This is already more personal than I intended." I said, "Yeah." She didn't look away. Neither did I. That was the first time it felt impossible to pretend we were still standing in the same place we started. We had not crossed the line yet, but by then I knew something simple and dangerous. The line was only still there because neither of us had touched it. Not because either of us still believed in it. It finally happened on a night that did not feel dramatic enough to change anything. That was probably why it changed everything. Mara had been quiet all day. Not cold, just turned inward in that way she had when work had taken too much out of her and she was still trying to act normal. I saw her near sunset when I got back with takeout, and she was sitting on her porch with a glass of water, shoes off, looking down at the steps like she had been there a while. I held up the bag and said, "I brought too much." She looked up. "That sounds intentional." "It sounds like I know my limits in a kitchen." That got the small smile, so I went over. We ate on her porch because neither of us said not to. The air was warm, the street was quiet, and the whole thing felt too familiar. Not like neighbors. Not like people inside some careful arrangement. Like 2 people who had already become part of each other's routine before either of them admitted it. At one point she asked, "Do you ever regret saying yes?" I answered too honestly, "Only when I think about it." She looked down at her food for a second, then said, "That's fair. I should have left it there." Instead I said, Do you? She leaned back in her chair and let out a slow breath. I regret that you've become important to me in the middle of something that was supposed to stay clear. That hit me so hard I stopped pretending I did not understand what had been building between us. I said, "You've become important to me too." She turned her head and looked at me fully then. No guarded tone. No polished answer ready. Just Mara, tired and honest and suddenly not hiding behind anything. The silence after that was different from every silence we had shared before. It wasn't careful. It wasn't polite. It felt like the last few inches of distance finally giving out. She stood first and took my empty container from my hand. I followed her inside because that also felt inevitable. In her kitchen, she set both containers near the sink, turned back toward me, and for a second neither of us moved. I remember how steady she looked and how impossible it was to act normal anymore. When I kissed her, she did not seem surprised. After that, there was no clean version of the story left. For a little while, I let myself believe maybe that was not a bad thing. We did not turn into some loud, careless couple overnight. If anything, we got quieter, more certain. She would come over in the morning with coffee already made because she knew mine was terrible. I would fix little things around her place without being asked. She started touching my arm when she passed me. I started staying later without checking the time. Once I woke up on her couch before sunrise with a blanket over me and heard her moving around in the kitchen, and the sound of it felt so normal it actually scared me. That was the dangerous part. Not the attraction. Not even crossing the line. It was how quickly it began to feel real. I started thinking maybe the strange beginning did not matter as much as what we were becoming now. Maybe two people could start in the wrong place and still end up honest. Maybe all the awkward pieces would settle if we just kept choosing each other. Then one evening I heard her on the phone through the open kitchen window. I was outside by the side fence, not trying to listen, but I caught my name and stopped without meaning to. Her voice was low, sharper than usual. I know what the numbers say. You don't need to repeat them. A pause. Then, no, I understand that. I understood it before. That is exactly why I could not afford to wait another year. I felt something cold move through me. She kept talking, quieter now, and I could not catch every word. But I heard enough. Last window. Low odds after this. Time already narrowing faster than she had told me. Not preference. Not rough timing. Not just a hard decision she had been weighing. Pressure. Real pressure. When she came outside a few minutes later and saw me standing there, she stopped immediately. She looked at my face once and knew. "What did you hear?" she asked. "Enough." That was all I said at first because I was trying very hard not to say 10 worse things. She came a little closer. "Then let me explain it properly." I laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. "Properly? Mara, you told me this mattered. You didn't tell me this was probably your last real chance." Her jaw tightened. "I told you time mattered. That is not the same thing." She looked away for half a second, then back at me. "No, it isn't." I hated how calm she stayed, because it made me feel like the messy one. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her answer came fast, almost before I finished. "Because I knew what it would sound like. Maybe because it was pressure." "Yes," she said, and that one word landed harder than if she had fought me. It was pressure. I live with that every day. I stared at her. "So you let me walk into this without the full truth." Her voice dropped. "I let you walk into it with enough truth to choose freely. That is not how it feels now." For the first time in a long while, she looked hurt in a way she could not smooth over. "Do you think I picked you because you were convenient?" I did not answer fast enough, and that was answer enough. She folded her arms tight across herself and nodded once like she had just been handed something she already feared. "That's the part one was trying to avoid." I said, quieter now. "I don't know what part one am to you anymore." "You are not a solution," she said. "That is exactly why this became impossible. It should have helped. Didn't. Because by then I cared too much to sort out whether I was loved, needed, trusted, or just there at the exact moment her life narrowed into one hard choice. We did not yell. That would have been easier. Instead, we stood in the space between our houses talking in low voices that hurt more because they stayed controlled. Every sentence felt personal. Every pause felt worse. That night, I went back into my place alone. The silence hit me differently than it had after my breakup. Back then I was empty. Now I was split open. I stopped answering her door the next day. Then the next. Not because I felt nothing. Because I felt too much, and I no longer trusted the shape of what we had become. I found out from somebody else, which somehow made it hurt more. It had been a little over a month since I pulled back. Long enough for the silence to become its own routine. I still lived in the same little rental house. Still woke up and looked toward her place before I could stop myself. Still heard her car sometimes and felt that stupid tightness in my chest like my body had not gotten the message yet. We did not fight after that last conversation. We just stopped. A few texts at first. Then fewer. Then nothing. I told myself that was cleaner. It was not cleaner. It was just emptier. One Saturday morning I was out front trying to fix the loose board on my porch steps when an older woman from 2 houses down slowed near the sidewalk and said, "Looks like your neighbor will have her hands full soon." I straightened up. "What?" She smiled in that casual neighborhood way people do when they think they are saying something obvious. She was at the pharmacy with vitamins and one of those little picture printouts from the doctor. Sweet thing looked half terrified, half happy. Then she kept walking before I could ask anything else. I stood there with the hammer still in my hand, not moving. For a full minute I told myself it could mean anything. Maybe the woman had it wrong. Maybe I was making a leap because I was already wired for it. But deep down I knew. I knew because the timing fit too cleanly. I knew because of the way Mara had gone quiet near the end. Like she was carrying information and measuring what it would cost to say it out loud. I went inside, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at my phone. I did not call right away. Part of me was too angry. Another part was scared of being wrong. But underneath both was something simpler. I needed to hear it from her. So I texted one line. "Did you know?" She answered 12 minutes later. Yes. That single word made my whole body go cold. I wrote back, "Why didn't you tell me? This time longer passed." Then, "Because I was trying to let you go cleanly." I read that 5 times. Then I grabbed my keys and went next door before I could think myself out of it. When she opened the door, she looked tired in a way I had not seen before. Not weak, just worn down, like she had been carrying too much alone and had decided that was better than reaching for someone who might only stay out of duty. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "You were really going to keep this from me?" Her hand stayed on the door. Yes. The honesty of it hit me harder than any excuse would have. I stepped inside when she moved back, and the place looked almost the same. Same books. Same soft lamp near the couch. Same careful order. But the air felt different. More fragile. More final. I turned to her. "Why?" She folded her arms, then let them fall again like even that felt too defensive. "Because by the time I knew for sure, you were already pulling away. And I understood why." "That doesn't answer it." "It does," she said quietly. "You just don't like it." I looked at her, waiting. She took a breath. "I did not want you walking back into this house because you felt trapped by me. Or by a baby. Or by the version of yourself that thinks leaving would make you a bad man." That landed so directly I could not even interrupt. She kept going, her voice steady but softer now. "You were already questioning everything. Whether I chose you for you. Whether I just reached for the nearest answer to a problem I could not solve alone. If I told you then, I would never know if you came back because you wanted me or because you thought you had to." I said, "You don't get to make that choice for me." "No," she said. "I don't. But I did." There it was. Clean. Uncomfortable. Completely her. I started to answer, then stopped because the truth was I understood exactly why she had done it. That was what made it so hard to stay angry in a simple way. It was unfair. It was also, in its own twisted way, the least selfish thing she had done since all this began. I walked a few steps toward the window, then back again. "Do you know what this felt like from my side?" She nodded once. "Probably not enough." It felt like every time I got close to understanding what we were, something underneath it changed. My voice got rougher than I meant it to. First it was this careful arrangement. Then it was us acting like that arrangement wasn't already broken. Then I find out how much pressure you were under from the start. And now this. Her eyes stayed on me. "I know. No, I don't think you do. I let out a breath and forced myself to say the ugliest part. I kept wondering whether I mattered to you outside the timing, outside the need, outside the fact that I happened to be right there. That was the first moment she looked close to breaking. She sat down slowly on the edge of the chair near the table, like standing suddenly took too much effort. You did matter outside of all of it, she said. That was the problem. If you had only been practical to me, this would have been easier. Colder, but easier. I stayed where I was. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. I asked you because I trusted you. That part was true. The urgency was true too. And then what grew between us was also true. None of those facts canceled the others out. That's why this became such a mess. I believed her. That was the worst and best part. The room went quiet. No careful wording left. No agreement to hide behind. No version of the story that made either of us look clean. Finally I said, when I left, it wasn't because I stopped caring. She held my eyes. I know. It was because I cared enough that I couldn't keep standing in something that felt half real and half desperate. A tiny nod. I know that too. I took a slow breath and looked at her properly for the first time since I walked in. She looked scared now. Not of me, of what answer was coming. And that was when it got simple. Not easy, just simple. I could stay out and protect my pride. Keep telling myself the beginning ruined everything. Keep acting like the messed up way it started erased what it had turned into. Or I could admit that whatever this was, I was still in it. I walked over to her and stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head up to look at me. I'm not here because I feel forced, I said. She didn't move. I'm here because even after all of it, I still want you in my life. Not as some obligation. Not because of the child. You. For a second she just stared at me, like she did not trust herself to hear it right. Then she asked, very quietly, Are you sure? I gave a short, tired laugh. No, I'm not sure about anything clean in this story, but I'm sure about that. Something in her face finally gave way. Not dramatic, just real. All that control loosening at once. She reached for my hand. I held on. And once that happened, once the choice was finally made without paperwork, timing, or fear speaking for us, there was nothing left to drag out. I stayed.